Starting next month, I need you to cover more. My job is stressful and you make more, so it's only fair. She said it casually, like she was adjusting a subscription. No discussion, no question. Just a conclusion she'd already reached. We were sitting at the kitchen table, bills spread out, coffee getting cold. I asked how much more meant, and she slid a note across with a number that rewrote our entire budget. We had shared finances by choice: rent, utilities, groceries, savings, everything transparent, or so I thought. We both worked full-time. We both agreed on a split that matched our incomes. This wasn't about survival, it was about expectation. I told her I needed to see the numbers again. She sighed and said I was overthinking it. That was the first red flag that day. Within minutes, the second one surfaced. When I pulled up our joint account, I noticed charges I didn't recognize. Small at first, then a pattern. Transfers to her personal card, late fees, interest charges. I asked what they were. She said, "It's nothing, I'll handle it." I pressed, not aggressively, just enough to understand why my share was suddenly supposed to grow. That's when she admitted she'd been carrying a balance on a separate credit card for months. Not emergency stuff, shopping. Weekend trips she'd told me were work things. A few expensive purchases she said she'd paid for already. She hadn't told me because, in her words, I didn't want you to worry. But she was worried enough to change the rules. The timeline became clear fast. Her minimum payments had jumped. Her paycheck wasn't covering it. Instead of adjusting her spending, she decided the gap should come from me. The ultimatum wasn't about fairness. It was about plugging a hole she'd made quietly. I asked why she didn't bring it up earlier. She shrugged and said, "I knew you'd react like this." That stung more than the debt. It meant she'd planned around my consent instead of asking for it. I told her I wasn't comfortable increasing my share to cover expenses I didn't agree to or know about. I said we could sit down, go line by line, figure out a real plan. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her of anything. I stayed factual. She leaned back and crossed her arms. "This is what partners do," she said. "If you can't step up, that tells me a lot." There it was. Not a request, a test. The conversation shifted after that. Not louder, but colder. She stopped explaining and started summarizing. According to her, I was being rigid. According to her, the debt was temporary. According to her, my higher income made this obvious. I asked if she was willing to freeze her spending until the balance came down. She said that wasn't realistic. I asked if she'd cut back on trips. She said work required it. I asked if she'd cancel any of the subscriptions tied to the card. She said those were mental health things. Every suggestion was met with a reason it wouldn't work. The only solution left standing was mine. Pay more, ask less, don't look too closely. I told her I needed time to think. She rolled her eyes and said time was the one thing she didn't have. The payment was due in 3 weeks. That was when I realized the urgency wasn't emotional. It was mathematical. Over the next few days, I paid attention to things I'd brushed off before. Packages arriving while I was at work, receipts tucked into coat pockets, a new jacket she said was on sale, a dinner with coworkers that showed up as a hotel charge. None of it was catastrophic on its own. Together, it formed a pattern of quiet decisions made with the assumption I'd absorb the impact. When I brought up the hotel charge, she laughed and said I was turning into an accountant. When I mentioned the packages, she said she deserved nice things. When I asked again about a plan, she said, "I already gave you one." The ultimatum sat between us like a deadline. I wasn't angry. I was alert. There's a difference. Anger wants release. Alertness wants clarity. I ran the numbers myself. If I took on her increase, my savings would stall, not collapse, just stop growing. The emergency fund we'd agreed on would pause indefinitely. The future purchases we'd planned would quietly drift out of reach. All so her spending habits wouldn't have to change. The last straw wasn't a fight. It was a text she sent while I was at work. "I told my mom you're helping more." She said that's what a real man does. She'd already framed the outcome publicly. She'd already decided how the story ended. I was just expected to play my part. That night I told her I wasn't agreeing to the new split. I said we needed to separate the debt from our shared expenses and figure out individual responsibility. I kept my tone steady. I didn't threaten anything. I didn't ask for praise. She looked at me like I'd broken a rule I didn't know existed. "If you don't do this," she said, "I don't know what that says about us." I said I understood, and for the first time since the conversation started, I meant it. The next morning, she acted like the decision was already made. She sent me a revised budget spreadsheet before I even left for work. My column was updated. Hers wasn't. I didn't respond right away. When I got home, she asked if I'd seen it. I said yes. She smiled like that settled it. I told her again that I wasn't taking on her debt. I said we could split shared expenses as before, and she could handle the balance she'd built. I offered to help her find a plan. I didn't offer money. She went quiet for a moment, then said I was being unsupportive. She said everyone she talked to agreed I was being selfish. She said she wouldn't be in this position if I'd been more encouraging of her career choices. That was new and convenient. I asked her why my support now depended on paying for decisions I wasn't part of. She said I was making it transactional. Then she reminded me that we lived together, that our lives were entangled, and that walking this back would be complicated. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. The second trigger escalated when I asked to see the full balance. She hesitated, then showed me the statement. It was higher than she'd implied. The interest alone was eating a noticeable chunk of her income. I asked why she'd minimized it. She said she didn't think the exact number mattered. It mattered to me. I pointed out that even if I covered more of the bills, the debt wouldn't disappear. It would just be hidden longer. She snapped that I was fixating on details instead of being a partner. She said, "I need you to just do this, not analyze it to death." That's when I realized this wasn't about help. It was about compliance. I told her I wasn't comfortable staying in a shared financial setup under those conditions. I said we needed to separate things until trust was rebuilt. I didn't say break up. I didn't threaten to leave. I framed it as a boundary. She laughed, not loudly, just enough to show disbelief. "So what? You're just going to abandon me when things get hard?" she asked. I said things didn't get hard by accident. They got hard because choices were made without me. She accused me of keeping score. She said my calm tone was condescending. She said if I loved her, this wouldn't be such a big deal. I didn't argue. I'd already said everything that mattered. That night, she slept on the couch by choice. The next day, she didn't speak to me. On the third day, she sent me a message while I was at the gym. "I paid the minimum, but I can't keep doing this alone." I replied once. I said we'd already discussed my position. When I got home, she was packing a small bag. Not leaving, just staging. She said she needed space to think. She also said she expected me to reconsider while she was gone. That was the moment the decision settled in. I didn't announce anything. I didn't demand an apology. I opened a new account and moved my direct deposit. I canceled my card on the joint account. I transferred my share of the rent for the month and nothing more. Clean, documented, on time. When she came back 2 days later, she noticed immediately. She asked why her card declined at the grocery store. I told her calmly that I'd separated my finances and that she should use her own account. She said I blindsided her. I reminded her she'd changed the rules first. The argument that followed wasn't loud, it was circular. She said I was punishing her. I said I was opting out. She said couples don't do this. I said couples also don't hide debt and then issue ultimatums. She tried one last angle. She said if I didn't reverse it, things would get awkward. Bills would be missed. People would ask questions. I said I was comfortable with that. The first real-world consequence showed up faster than I expected. A week later, she asked if I could temporarily cover a utility payment because her account was overdrawn. I said no. The lights didn't go out, but the late fee posted. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She stared at the screen and went very still. That night, she slept in the bedroom again. Not with warmth, with calculation. I packed a small bag the next morning. Not everything. Just enough. I told her I'd be staying elsewhere for a bit while we figured things out. I left my keys on the counter and my share of the grocery money in an envelope. She asked if this was really happening. I said yes. And for the first time, she didn't have an answer ready. Final update. I stayed with a friend for a week, then signed a short-term lease closer to work. I didn't post about it. I didn't announce anything. I updated my address with my employer and moved on. We spoke twice after I left. Both times were about logistics. She asked when I'd be back. I said I wasn't. She asked if this was permanent. I said I was separating my life until trust existed again. She didn't argue. She pivoted. The consequences didn't need my help. Without my income buffering things, the numbers caught up fast. The minimum payment she'd managed before jumped again. A second card hit its limit. One of the subscriptions she'd called necessary bounced. Then another. The late fees stacked. She started asking indirect questions. If I knew how to negotiate with banks, if I'd ever consolidated debt, if my credit union did personal loans. I answered neutrally when I did answer. Mostly I didn't. Her tone changed. Less confident, less certain. She stopped telling me what partners do and started asking what I thought she should do. I didn't give advice. Advice implies responsibility. A mutual friend mentioned she'd tried to put a few expenses on a family member's card and got turned down. Another said she'd picked up extra shifts and was still behind. I didn't confirm or deny anything. I wasn't involved. 2 weeks after I left, the landlord emailed us both about a late utility payment tied to the unit. I forwarded it to her and paid my half directly like I said I would. No commentary, no reminder. The issue resolved itself the way unpaid things always do, slowly, then all at once. She asked if we could reset and try again with clearer rules. I asked what had changed. She said she understood now that money was stressful. I asked if the debt was gone. She said no, but she was working on it. That was the answer. Her reputation took a quiet hit. Friends who'd heard the earlier version of the story started asking questions. The timeline didn't add up. The numbers didn't either. People noticed when plans got canceled and dinners got skipped. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't need to. A month later, she asked if I could co-sign a consolidation loan just to help get things stable. I declined without explanation. She sent a long message after that about loyalty and abandonment. I didn't respond. The silence did more than any argument could have. I moved the rest of my things when she was at work. No scene, no witnesses. I left the place cleaner than I found it. I mailed her my keys. I closed the last shared account. The pressure didn't explode. It compressed. Bills came due. Options narrowed. The safety net disappeared because it had always been me. We ran into each other once, months later, at a grocery store. She looked tired, not devastated, just worn down. She asked how I was. I said I was good. She said she was figuring things out. I wished her well and meant it. There was no closure conversation, no apology tour, no final fight, just distance. The life I built afterward was quieter, predictable, balanced. My savings recovered. My plans stayed intact. I didn't gain anything dramatic. I stopped losing. That was the consequence.